Welcome to the Boyce Turner Employment Law Pod. My name's Helen Goss and I'm a member of the employment team. And in the employment law pods, we look at recent legislation, interesting cases, or just matters that are coming across our desk that we think that you're going to find interesting. Now, today I've got my professional friend, Rebecca Wilmington from HR Central. HR Central are an HR consultancy that we regularly work together with. So, Rebecca, welcome to the Employment Pod.
Thank you, Helen.
And can you just tell us a little bit about HR Central?
Yes, thank you. HR Central have been going for 20 years now. We deal with outsourced HR for a variety of clients. We're industry agnostic. We deal with everything from recruitment through to termination and everything in between.
So a short while ago, Rebecca and I did a pod talking about how to maximise the value of your business when you are planning on sales. So whether that's 6 months, a year, or even in an ideal situation where you've got the opportunity to get everything right in 3 or 5 years. So today we're going to be doing part 2. Now, before I get into what we're going to cover, this is part of a series that we're managing with the corporate team. So on the website, we've got a fascinating case study by Rich Paulin, who worked with a business that considerably increased its value. And in fact, Rebecca, that's a business that you and I both worked on, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
It was such an interesting case study, and Rich sets out about how sometimes it's the boring admin, can I just say that's his terminology, not mine, that creates that massive success and increase in value. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. And a lot of business owners see it exactly the same way.
I really recommend that you have a look on the website at Rich Paulin's case study, which is called Pre-Sale Preparation Protects Exit Value. Rich and Chris Dobson, a partner in our corporate team, have also done an interview in the podcast. And again, really interesting to get both their insights from the corporate side of matters. Now, Becca, last time we looked at getting the right organisational structure, if you remember. So where are the gaps and do you have the right people in critical roles on the right terms? We looked at succession planning, which is a massive thing. A lot of businesses just don't ever really address their succession planning. And we looked about making sure that your contracts are up to date, including the handbook. So today, Rebecca and I thought it would be useful to look at culture, engagement and communication, legal risks, and then post-sale planning. So now then, culture, engagement and communication. So easy to say, and we all trot these terms out, don't we? But the all companies, as you say, in all sectors, seem to be quite bad at getting that right. Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of times it's because the business owner has their own view on things and they don't think about how the business should present itself in its own entity. So the culture becomes how the manager or the business owner feels about life, rather than it being a considered move to have a culture that supports people and moves the business forward.
Yes, and I think that you'll find that every business will say, oh, we've got a great culture, but actually so much that goes on in the business would actually suggest otherwise, wouldn't it? How would a buyer assess a company's culture? So I've got a few suggestions, Becca, so it would be really interesting to get your view on this. So we talked a little bit about management style. How does that potentially affect culture in particular?
I think it has a massive impact on culture because people, as I said before, really, they have their own view on things and they put their stamp on the business. I think it's really important to understand and be self-aware about what you are buying in relation to the management style. And there are lots of psychometric tests that you can do in relation to understanding the way that people like to work. We do a lot of that with our management team, and we did that with the company that Rich was talking about too, to really understand where the gaps were so that we could fill those gaps prior to sale, and to ensure that the management team were working to the same goals.
And so that there was presumably some sort of balance then. So if someone's strong in a particular area,
Yes.
but poor in another, that you've got some other team member who then balances out that skill set
Yes.
and the approach
Yes.
that they take. Yeah. People sometimes poo-poo exit interviews, but I think you've said in the past that you think those are quite useful indications of what's going on in a business.
Yes, it depends who carries them out. I think if you're asking somebody internally to do it, so for example, if the manager who has managed that team player for a long time does an exit interview, they're not going to have an honest response. So we tend to get involved at exit interview level, and we are independent, so people do talk to us about what's going on, and then we can use that to sort of form the policy going forward. So we always say to people, look, you're telling us this in confidence unless you tell us that you've stolen the crown jewels or that somebody's doing something really badly wrong. But we do incorporate what they tell us in the policies that we develop going forward, so that there is continuous improvement for the company.
So when there has been agreement that you can share what has been said to the management level, is there sometimes a bit of a shock when the C-suite understands what people are saying as the reason for exit?
Sometimes. I think what we try to do is to identify a trend, because what you don't want to do is to go back to someone and give feedback when it's a personal issue or there's a personality type situation. So we tend to look for trends and then go back to the board with a recommendation for change that's based on lots of feedback or a couple of people's feedback. So there's a theme rather than it being personal.
Yeah, no. And that presumably ties in also to disciplinaries and grievances. What can you tell from a review of recent disciplinaries and grievances?
You can tell a lot, because if it's the same people that are always aggrieved, or the same department, or the management style isn't really conducive to making the change following a grievance or a disciplinary situation, rinse repeat isn't really a good look when you're trying to feed that back to the board. So we have to encourage change to happen, or things just fester and you end up with more of the same, lots of wastage.
Yeah, so again, presumably you're looking for that pattern or trend, aren't you?
Yes, definitely.
And I have seen quite often that some paths lead to one person on a fairly frequent basis, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
They really do.
Yeah.
I think also we encourage employee surveys as well, and you can do those confidentially so that you don't end up with people feeling they can't say what they want to.
You mean anonymously?
Yes, sorry, yeah. Anonymously, yeah. So that we can feed that back, and that's actually easier to feed back because it's usually en masse. You have the data, you can have comments as well, and we can be quite selective and tactful about how we feed that back to the board.
And how do you find that people, what do you find they will do with the information or the trends or the patterns that you find? So are they keen to address them, or do they just say, yeah, no, fine, and put it away in the drawer and then we never hear any more about it?
I'm quite firm with the C-suite.
Right.
I'll come as a shock to you. I tell them if they're not going to look at the results and not going to act on them, not to do the survey in the first place, because you can do more damage by asking people's opinions and ignoring it.
Yes, that's a really, really strong point, actually, isn't it? Because people have gone to the trouble to actually write down what is causing them upset or anger or disappointment, and then nothing changes.
That's right. And we see the take-up drops off. And so it tells us whether we're actually doing the right thing in relation to the feedback.
Do you mean the number of people completing the surveys?
Yeah, so initially you'll see probably a take-up. On average, it's around 75% first time, because everybody wants to have their say.
Yes.
And they're interested to see the changes that might happen. If those changes don't happen the next time you do a survey, which should happen quite regularly, they just say, well, there's no point in me giving my time to this because nothing changed as a result last time. So you have to be really mindful of that.
Yeah, and that's massive disappointment then, isn't it, with the employees? I was going to ask you this thought of gut instinct. So the feel of the business when you walk through the door, is that madness, or can you pick up on the vibes just walking into the business and understanding something about it in those initial stages?
Yes, definitely. And I think the smaller the business, the more concentrated that feeling is. I think if you've got a lot of people milling around, it's quite difficult to understand the culture of a place. until you get to know everybody and have worked with the business for a while. But if you walk into a small environment, nobody greets you, or everybody looks grumpy and bad-tempered, you can pick up quite quickly what the issues are.
Yeah.
So the smaller the business, I think, the more pronounced it is.
Yes, it's interesting you said that. We went to see a new client just a few weeks ago, and they manufacture very new technology, and it's really, really interesting stuff that they do. And when we got there, the person who was on reception was so keen for us to look at, they had a video on repeat on the wall in reception, and he was so keen to tell us about it. And he said, it's just so amazing and it's so exciting. And if you ask so to take you into the where they actually put this technology together, he said, it's amazing. Yeah. And I was so impressed by his enthusiasm for what the business was doing. It was really, really telling that they were taking people with them on that journey.
Yeah, it's infectious.
Yes.
You have the right people on the front desk. You enter and it's a nice environment, it's friendly, it's welcoming. And you also have to have a culture of zero tolerance of poor behaviour.
Yes.
So as a business owner, I don't tolerate that within my business. It's stamped out immediately if everybody has bad days, but if it carries on and it's unpleasant and makes life difficult for people to work in a positive environment, it's about stamping it out. You have to address it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And then we hear a lot, don't we, about company values, and I have sat through many workshops over my career where we talk about what are the values, what are the words that we're going to use to try and express the company values. And I know that people pay large sums of money to consultants to work on their values with them. What's your view about how people live their values within businesses?
I always advise my clients, rightly or wrongly, to throw it out the window.
Do you?
Yeah, I think you shouldn't focus on fancy words. It's a little like your policies. If they all look lovely and fancy, but you're not following them, you're just going to trip up over them. So actually, it's better to have something that's meaningful, that everybody buys into, that is reflective of how you operate, than it is to have fancy wording that just doesn't mean anything to anybody.
No. You and I have talked about one of your concepts of a dictionary of behaviours. What is that and how does that work?
It's something that we developed when I was working with scientists, and it became really obvious that I thought about things much differently to the way they did. Their attention to detail was amazing off the scale. I'm really high decisive, high influential. I just needed a yes or no in relation to an answer as to whether somebody was suitable for a position, where they'd want to write a thesis on the reasons why.
Yes.
So we had to agree in the middle. And so I developed this concept of having a dictionary of behaviours where there was common language within the business. So if you said something, everybody could interpret it. And there's usually 3 levels within a competency, if you want to call it competency. So teamwork, for example, would be everybody who has to work as part of a team, but then you'd have more collaboration at a senior level and then again at board level. So you could refer to it, and actually it really helps with appraisal conversations, it helps with internal comms, even with grievances and disciplinaries, because you're able to reference what you mean exactly, and everybody uses the same terminology and the same way of working.
It's the common language.
Yes, and it's kind of building on the value set, really. But I found it really useful. Then we also used disc profiles, which had different coloured red, yellow, blue, green for each sort of area of your work preference. And I had red and yellow on the top of mine, so everybody knew that I was high decisive. So you just had to say yes and I would get on with it. As I'd go to talk to a scientist and see the blue and the yellow and think, right, I need to give them a bit more detail for them to be able to make the right decision. So it's just about understanding your workforce, it's understanding your colleagues. But to give everybody a common language is a really good way forward.
That's fascinating. What about appraisals? Because I think most businesses, we do still come across some where appraisals are supposed to happen, but of course they don't happen. And it's always a point of grievance with employees because they want to understand how they're doing. And sometimes there's a little bit of a mismatch between how they think they're doing and perhaps how management think they're doing. But they still want to have that feedback on their performance. So what does an appraisal tell you about a business?
It tells me that there's an open communication style if those appraisals are taking place. I think it's a really healthy way of communicating. It means that it's not just about imparting information to an employee, it's about receiving feedback from that employee about how they're experiencing life within the business. Also, There's a really old case study that I worked on for a very well-known China company who had a lot of breakages. And they weren't talking to their employees about these breakages. They were just assuming that it was a problem. When they actually spoke to the employees at my request and asked them what they thought the problem was, they were hanging the cups up to dry on their handles. And of course, that's where the breakages were. Oh. So the employees said, well, just lay them flat rather than trying to hang them up and you'll have less breakages. And that's exactly what happened. So I think it's not just about performance and telling somebody that they're wrong. It's actually talking and engaging with people who are doing the jobs on the shop floors or in the office environment so that the benefit of their experience can be incorporated into other areas and some appreciation of what they're doing. Because I don't think people come to work on average to do a bad job. No. They come to work because they want to do a good job.
Yes.
And I think if you're encouraging people to do that and having that open communication, it will all work towards a better outcome.
Yes, that's really interesting actually, isn't it? But of course, so many managers will go to someone else's appraisal and do all the talking, which I always find fascinating because really they should be doing all the listening.
Yes. And I think if I had £1 for every manager who rolled their eyes when I mentioned appraisals, I wouldn't have to work.
Yeah.
And I don't think it has to be a very complex process. It is a conversation. And whether there's even any documented outcome from that is arguable. I think it's probably best if there is.
Yes.
But as long as one of the people in the room makes a note of what's been said, or even just record it so you can have that recording going forwards. But I think the most important piece is to have the communication and to have that conversation rather than having a very verbose system in place that nobody wants to follow.
I completely understand that. So I just wanted to move on now to communication, which is where everybody, I think, gets 1 out of 10 from their employees about communication. So whether that's communication with employees on a day-to-day basis, but also potentially in relation to the future of the business and big things that are going to happen. What is the risk then if your communication is that bad as a business?
I think you don't keep people engaged. People can't do their best work. And actually they might have ideas on how to contribute to the business if you've communicated the plans for the business. I think if you keep everything in isolation, how are people ever going to know what they can contribute for the good of the business? It doesn't have to be verbose, it doesn't have to be every day, but I think regular catch-ups, regular meetings, team meetings to discuss, and also there's so many people now that are working hybrid. They're working from home. Yes. They don't engage with people in the office like we used to every day in the office, Monday to Friday. So I think it's about keeping people engaged, but bringing them together as a team so that you get to understand how other people work within the business so that you can do your best work as a team.
Yeah. And of course, particularly when you're going through a potential sale of the business, employees get very jittery, don't they?
They do, yeah.
And they worry about what they know, what they don't know, what you're hiding, what you're not telling them. And you've got that risk, really, of people leaving because they're so uncertain about what's happening. And of course, it's always the people that you don't want to leave who go, and then you potentially have the people who stay are the ones that perhaps it might not have been heartbreaking had they actually gone. Yeah. So I just really wanted to touch on retention incentives. That's something that the businesses you work with use much.
Some of them do, yes. And bonuses are obviously the obvious retention. Some of our clients play those bonuses forward, so they allocate an amount and say if you stay for another 2 years you can have that money at the end of that time, or they give them share options. I think for most of my clients though, and I probably will be shouted down for saying this, I don't think money is the main objective. If people are paid fairly and they get a bonus occasionally to say thank you if the business is doing really well, I think most people want to feel part of something special. They want to feel that they've contributed something, that their contribution has helped in some way. People get a lot of job satisfaction out of being part of something and being part of a team. And a thank you and a regular thank you and being recognised is often, in my view, better than money. And some of the scientists that we work with, they certainly didn't want bonuses. They wanted to be recognised for their technical capability.
Their expertise. Yes. I mean, I know you and I have talked many times about, as well, the business looking to create things that are desirable to employees as well. So we've talked about paying, yes, at the right levels so that people feel that they're at market rate and they're getting what their skill set is worth. But it's also flexibility, being open and understanding to issues that they may have, whether that's work issues or even home issues. It's about listening. You talked about the China company, that they actually listened to why there was so many breakages from the people who knew why there were. It's, again, I think you talked about the right culture of trust between management, employees. It's developing their careers. So I think that's important, isn't it? Through the appraisal system, making sure they get the right training.
Yes.
And then, I suppose, developing their career path.
Yes. And in my business specifically, I encourage people to work on the things that they like working on.
Yeah.
So if there's something they like doing and that piece of work comes in, I'll allocate it to them. But I have to know that to be able to do that. So it is important to get to know your staff and understand their aspirations and what they like doing. Obviously, there's things that they have to do that they might not like to do. We can't all do things that we like all day long. But I think just recognising that makes them much more open to helping you when there is a situation, and they will be flexible. It's about having an open, proper, grown-up conversation with your teams and understanding what their pressure points are, because if somebody's not performing, to go straight to disciplinary isn't often the way forward. It's about understanding why they may be under par and being supportive of that, so that when you need support as a business owner, they'll step up and be flexible in return.
Absolutely. Just wanted to talk about legal risk. There are a lot of businesses that develop a legal risk that perhaps they don't need to, just because of an inadvertent error. So we hear about the naming and shaming of companies who are not paying the minimum wage, not because that's necessarily their intention, but because there's a blip over the correct holiday pay or the rates, etc. Have you had experiences of that with
Yes.
the companies?
Yes, we have. And I think business owners aren't necessarily monitoring the employment law changes or updates to salary amounts that need to be paid. There's a lot of changes taking place at the moment. And I think business owners are a little wary of it. And actually it's knowing where to go to find the information that's accurate and precise enough for you to implement within your business whilst you're doing an operational day job, whilst you're managing the team, whilst you're looking at sales in a very different and difficult environment, as many of us are as business owners. So there's a lot going on for business owners right now, and I think they can inadvertently slip into a problem if they're not having the right advice.
Yes, I think that's a really good point, actually, because there's so much information about the Employment Rights Act coming out at people. It's hard then for them to pick out the points that they actually need to take action on, rather than note in their knowledge. So I think that's a really good point. The other thing is that a company who is looking to buy you will want to look at your potential tribunal liabilities. So they will look at your disciplinaries and your grievances and any investigations that you've got ongoing. And it's really boring of the lawyers, and I can't apologise for it, because if there are notes of conversations, it's always going to be more useful than no notes of any conversations.
Absolutely. But I think it's about protecting yourself as a business owner too. So it's not just for sale, it's for day-to-day business operation. If you have a proper note of what's been said and agreed by both parties, retrospectively that's so much easier to deal with than having I think they said this kind of rhetoric when you're trying to resolve a problem. And also I think it shows prospective buyers that you are actually having those meaningful conversations with people, and they are documented, and it's a good habit to get into.
And it's protection for the business.
Absolutely.
Because the employee will have taken their notes or their own covert recordings, and whilst you can go blue in the face telling them they shouldn't do that, they'll still do that. Health and safety compliance. Now, that's something that you're focusing on at HR Central at the moment, isn't it?
It is. We've outsourced it, but we have a number of trusted advisors that we give that work to. But they also work in conjunction with us in relation to management training, which is something that we do. So we're just sort of trying to make it all joined up, really. So health and safety shouldn't really be in isolation. It should be around training and educating people and making sure that people have the right skill to work within a business, especially if it's a warehouse environment or something where they need to really be focusing on the right skill level. driving a forklift truck, for example, need to make sure they've got the right documentation in place, that it's recorded properly, that refresher training takes place. So it sort of almost fits in with what we're doing as an HR consultancy.
And of course, where people are working on a hybrid basis, you've also got to ensure that there is health and safety from their home office, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. Along with insurances as well. So they have to make sure that they've got the right insurance in place. But if somebody falls over at home because they're using an ironing board as a desk, or they've got a bad back as a result of not having the correct chair set up, you're still liable if they're working from home. So you need to protect yourself as a business and have a proper DSE assessment.
Absolutely. And then just quickly touch on data privacy. I mean, we've all got to comply with GDPR requirements, but even basic things, I know you've talked about protecting your confidential information, and even down to where do you store that information, who can access it, because those can be quite problematic issues, can't they?
Yes, they can. And I've seen a lot of cyber attacks recently with some small businesses who don't think they're going to be a target. And they've had ransoms for £500,000.
Gosh,
and
that's shocking, isn't it?
It is shocking and actually unexpected and very close to home. So I think having a proper HR information system where everything's locked down, you have proper security in place, makes life easier to find information when you need it. But I think also employees like to know that their data is safe and that they can access it when they need to. I think it shows that you're committing to having employees and making sure that things are done correctly. I think also from an AI perspective, AI is with us to stay.
Yes.
It's about having the right policies in place and making sure that employees understand their commitment to that, so they're not putting confidential information out into the World Wide Web, that there is a documented way of managing data within the business. But having that HR information system is key, in my opinion.
Then post-sale transition planning, I think that's really about, again, a clear communication plan, isn't it?
Yes, I think you have to communicate when you're going to sell, during the sale process, and what's going to happen to those employees after the sale. Because actually, if you're leaving as a business owner, you might not feel that you're as invested in the business after you've left. It might be that you have a tie-in, that you have to stay for a couple of years, which may make some employees feel happier about staying. But it's still about having that conversation so that everybody knows that they can stay exactly as they are, invariably, unless there are big changes. And if those big changes are taking place, to communicate those so that people have a choice. They can either stay and go with the regime as it is or as it planned, or they can make a decision to leave. But I think having those proper conversations with people, if somebody is going to leave and you have a good relationship with them, you can usually negotiate and say, well, could you just stay for a little bit longer and let's get this over the line? Maybe give them a bonus or incentive to stay. I think it's just about proper open communication all the way through the process.
It can create all sorts of problems that perhaps don't even exist.
Exactly.
Because people don't know what's
that.
happening. And I think that also relates to knowledge transfer, doesn't it? That's an important consideration.
Yes, I think we touched on succession planning last time, but it's ever more important when you're selling a business to really make sure you've got the right skills in place, not only because the prospective buyers will want to see that. I think it's around people feeling secure that they have got a job going forwards because the business maybe isn't going to change.
Yeah. So it's that clarity of what comes next, essentially.
Yes.
And sometimes the business doesn't, especially the business that's been acquired, doesn't necessarily know. If they're a small business taken into a much larger business, they may not know. But it's to be honest and share what you do know, and presumably to go and talk to the new owners and try and get that clarity from them.
Yes, and encourage them to get involved in the conversations. Yes. We've been involved with a lot of business sales where, as the HR representative, we've gone to some of the meetings to answer those questions and to just check the temperature of what's going on.
Yeah.
But encourage both parties to attend. So the people that are buying, there's a management team that are buying, and the existing management team, so that there is that united front for employees to ask questions and to seek information when they need it.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Rebecca. So I think what all of this tells us is that it's really important for businesses that are looking to sell themselves to put their best foot forward, to plan, to implement whatever steps they identify as being necessary, to communicate where you can, and to just check your processes and corporate governance at all stages. And in fact, we have prepared an exit guide for this due diligence, which is on our website. So do have a look, because it's a really good starting point to try and understand next steps. We've also got part 1. So Rebecca and I did part 1 on how essentially HR strategy drives business sale value, and the case study by Rich and the interview by Rich Paulin and Chris Dobson. Rebecca, thank you so much. Your insights are so interesting. We could talk forever, so thank you so much for your input.
Thank you for having me, Helen.
Pleasure. Thanks for listening to the Employment Law Pod. If you'd like to check out more interviews in this series, then please do go to the Boyce Turner website. You can also follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. Goodbye, everyone.